Welcome to the After Chat. I'm Michael.
I'm Madison.
And today we are going to be talking about loneliness. Everybody experiences it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the After Chat. Real questions. Real talk. Real life.
So what's the most ridiculous impulse purchase you've ever made?
That's a tough question to answer. I've made many ridiculous impulse purchase in my day. Many. I think the one that feels the most unnecessary and is also fairly recent, I went to a Renaissance fair with my friend, which, by the way, was so much fun. Like, there were bagpipes, and somebody was dressed as, like, a queen, and there was a parade walking with her. Like, it really was a good time. But I got suckered in by the people that are, like, there selling their products. Mm-hmm. There were so many, like, cool things to buy, and I should have known better. But I walked away with, like, first of all, like, a leather bag that you, like, you carry it because it's, like, threaded through your belt. And It's like this big pouch that, like, you can close and keep stuff in.
A little fanny pack.
Yeah, kind of like a rustic fanny pack.
Okay.
And then I also got, like, a legit dagger. And it's really, really pretty.
Okay.
It's, like, Damascus steel, so it's got, like, those lines and stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very cool walking around with it on my belt, like a little Renaissance person. It was fun.
That is cool.
It was very expensive.
Where was the fair at?
Oh, gosh. It was in Virginia.
Okay.
I'll look it up. I'll tell you. Because I know my friend that I went with, Connie, we're looking to go for another date. Because it starts in May, I think. But it's a really good time. It was at a vineyard. And so it was beautiful. Mm-hmm. Like, beautiful area. Lots of spots with shade. Lots of spots in the sun. There were horses. There was jousting. Like,
oh, sweet.
It was a good time. It was a good time. And
like,
the tickets for, like, the day... they weren't that expensive for, like, an entire day event, and they had, like, fair food, so you could get, like, a turkey leg if you wanted the authentic experience. They were sold out of turkey legs by the time that we were hungry, which was a tragedy, but yeah, it was a good time. Like,
so the joust, like, folks for real armor, riding horses down with the big long sticks.
So I think that was what it was technically supposed to be, and I think that happened earlier in the day, and I think we missed it. But there was something afterwards where it was like they were basically talking through it and explaining, and there was some extenuating circumstance why they couldn't do it again. But it was advertised for, like, full jousting.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't know how you do that in a trick ride. Like, how do you not get hurt? But I don't know. They're probably professionals.
No, I love fair food. Like the turkey legs. Like, I remember any time where you go and you see one of those, like, you just I'm going to get one every single time.
I've never actually gotten one before.
They used to have them at Water Country, like USA. Like, there was
they have them at Busch Gardens, right? Like, in the regular park.
I don't know if they do there. Oh. I've not seen them there, but I did see them at Water Country. So, like, there I was in, like, flippy flops and swim trunks. Like, went down a water slide and then just got a massive fat turkey leg.
That's a good day.
It was the coolest thing. So I am a sucker for the little items that they have.
Little trinkets.
Like in the checkout aisles of, like, places.
Yeah.
So was at Joann Fabrics the other day.
Oh, they have the worst lead up to their checkout with little things.
No, they've got all sorts of things. So I'm in there, and, like, we were getting some, like, fabric and some yarn and stuff. And so we're in the checkout and we're on our way out. And I see these little hedgehogs, and it promised to, like, all of these things get me. Like, it promised to increase the efficiency of my dryer. They're called dryer buddies. So there's these two little hedgehogs with all of these little spikes. And
they're working men.
Yeah. And it says that if you put them in with your clothes, it will separate them faster, increase airflow. Your dryer will dry quicker. The things will they'll be more fluffy because of the little spines that are on them. I don't know how true all of this is, but
have you tested them yet?
I mean, yeah, no, they're in my dryer.
Oh.
Like they live in there now, but I don't know if they're actually increasing the efficiency and saving me money in the long run.
They've got to be because they're hedgehogs.
But I want to believe it.
Yeah.
And so so boom, there I was.
I'm a sucker for that stuff as well.
Like total impulse and
You should you should pick up like a side hobby of like just catching up with them when you do laundry. Just like open the dryer and be like, hey guys, you need to take a quick 5.
and so that was my most ridiculous recent impulse purchase.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to shift gears just a little bit here for this next one. So what image or smell or sound triggers like a feeling of nostalgia for you?
That's a really good question. There's one specific perfume that I got when I was little, and I think that I felt like so excited to have it because it was the first like glass bottle of perfume I had ever gotten. And it was from the Bath and Body Works like American Girl line. They had, do you know what American Girl dolls are?
Yes, my daughters had them.
I figured since you're a girl dad, you know what American Girl dolls are. So, I mean, iconic. The the best like doll line in history, in my opinion. So they like set up a product line with Bath and Body Works, and they had like, I don't know, they had like shower gel, lotion, perfume, and then they had a really fancy perfume that was in the glass bottle, which is what I got. It was called Truly Me, and it smelled so fresh and nice. And so I remember the last time that I smelled it was like when I was going through stuff, and it was me actually throwing that bottle away, and because it had, I didn't have much left in it anymore, and I smelled it, and I was like, I'm a child again. So I don't know if I could experience it anytime soon because I don't think they sell them anymore. But yeah, smells I think are the biggest things that will like send me back in time.
No, I mentioned it before. Like asphalt does that for me. Like the smell of asphalt takes me back to my Grammys. But another one that does that is funnel cakes.
Oh.
Like whenever I smell funnel cakes, it takes me back. So I lived in this little village in Illinois, and every year like it was called like the farmers picnic, and like they still do it.
Aww.
And so like the whole town is like 400 people, like everybody goes up on like the little hill that's where the fair is, and they have all these vendors. But that was like where I first smelled funnel cakes, and so I loved going to that little picnic. It was so cool. I got the opportunity to take my girls to it one year whenever they were still little, and like it was such a great time. But like that smell of funnel cakes takes me back to that, August every year during the harvest time out there, the little farmers picnic.
Oh, mine for that time frame, same time frame, different smell would be what is it called? Brunswick stew.
Okay.
When I can smell Brunswick stew cooking like over a fire, it makes me think of the fall time, because the church that I grew up at like made Brunswick stew every fall for our harvest festival that we did.
Oh, cool.
So it's kind of similar like annual thing.
Yeah.
And man, I could throw down on some Brunswick stew right now. I just made myself hungry.
So we're going to be talking about loneliness in this episode. So did you ever experience loneliness as a child? We should probably go ahead and define what that is before we even talk about it.
Sure.
So we're going to be kind of separating just being alone from feeling lonely.
Yeah.
So feeling alone doesn't always mean feeling lonely. Like alone is just a physical state. Like, I'm at the house, I'm by myself, I'm alone. But loneliness, on the other hand, it's more of an emotional state. It's the sense of longing for connection or companionship. You may even be surrounded by other people, but you will still feel lonely. So you can be alone and perfectly content, but feeling lonely is when you just crave a deeper connection with another human.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely experienced loneliness as a child. I would say because I had a sibling, I think that I experienced it we were and still are very close. So I don't think it happened as much as when I was a teenager. So like child, probably not as much. But once I hit teenager years and I started to experience some mental health struggles, then I definitely encountered that.
I mean, I think that's probably common for most. I mean, especially during like the awkward teen years, like to experience it to some degree. But like, I think I've mentioned on here before, I don't know, maybe I haven't, but whenever my family, like kind of, the nuclear family kind of fractured and we had a lot of, family trauma and stuff like that, there was a long period of time where, I mean, even though there was 4 siblings and my folks, like it was still just, there was nobody to talk to or relate to, like what it was like whenever your family life just kind of implodes. Yeah. And so like that, I definitely felt loneliness then. And then just how do you cope with it? Like whenever you experience that, what did you do to cope?
I don't think that I really consciously did anything. I mean, I know later we're going to talk about maybe some of the unhealthy coping skills that we had. But I don't think even with the bigger stuff that I navigated through that I consciously was trying to deal with it. I don't think I recognized what was happening because it was everything that I had always known as far as anxiety, but it was just worsened as I got older, or the fact that I was homeschooled and so I didn't have a big circle of friends. That was, amplified when I also was looking for a new church when we had moved. So I didn't have the same circle that I had. At least I got to see them once a week, So I didn't cope well. But I don't think that I tried to.
Yeah, and same. Like I know that I didn't cope with it well, but I don't think in the moment, like whenever I was experiencing it, I would have put my finger on it and said, this is loneliness that I'm feeling. Yeah. Like it's not until like you look back at stuff in hindsight that you're like, that's what I was really experiencing, because I didn't have the vocabulary to even really articulate what it was I was feeling. Yeah. In the first place. So. And we'll talk later, like you just mentioned, like I coped with it in all the wrong ways.
Yep, me too.
So for this episode, we're going to look at some people in the Bible who kind of went through some stuff alone, or based on some of the things that they said, you can kind of read into it that they were experiencing some form of loneliness. Yeah. And so the first one that we will look at here is Jesus. So this is an instance where Jesus might have experienced loneliness during his temptation in the wilderness. Like we do know that he went out and did this on his own, and you can read about it in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 4. So you can picture Jesus. He's out there. He's fasting for 40 days of night, and he like just puts himself in a completely vulnerable and alone state. And this is when Satan approached him. He was alone, he was vulnerable, he was at a weakened state, and that's how temptation typically works. And so we can see Satan try to exploit this moment of weakness. And in his struggle, when he's alone, Jesus faces the allure and temptation of power and fame and comfort, which is something that we all can relate to. Yep. But in his solitude, like Jesus finds strength in his connection with God, and he was able to resist it and emerge victorious in that. But it was in that solitude where Jesus shows us that even in our loneliest moments that we can find solace and resilience in our faith. And just another moment when Jesus he was surrounded by his disciples, and he was longing for just like their support. Like here he is in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is in Matthew 26. And we see him in there. This is like before the trials and his eventual crucifixion. He's just grappling with the weight of all of that. And I love this. Well, I mean, I don't love it, but it just speaks to the where he was at. Yeah. Where he was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And he asks his disciples to stay awake with him. But they keep falling asleep because they're knuckleheads like that, Yeah. So he's leaving. It just left him to face all of that anguish and that weight and that fear, just all alone. And it's just an important scene where you can see Jesus in his humanity, like he's just craving companionship and support. And I mean, I imagine he must have felt very alone and probably even abandoned a little bit. And just whenever I read that, like preparing for this, it just took on a whole new type of weight and meaning to it.
Wow.
And so, like, you can see how Jesus can relate to us whenever we're feeling that.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I think he goes to the far extreme there in that moment that we, I mean, luckily don't have to deal with. I mean, I'm sure that there are Christ followers in the world who have gotten to that point of being so overwhelmed with sorrow. And that just makes me realize that there's a moment there to experience some gratitude that I haven't experienced that depth of emotion. I don't think. Okay, so we're gonna rewind back to the Old Testament now and talk about Joseph. So this is Joseph, the one who had the coat of many colors. I think that's kind of the common way to recognize which Joseph we're talking about. So this story you can read in Genesis. It picks up in chapter 37, and then it continues in chapter 39, and it's basically the whole story of just one thing after another that happened to him. So he gets, like, I'm going to just summarize for us quickly. His brothers are jealous of him because they think that he's his dad's favorite.
He is.
He is. He's definitely his dad's favorite.
It's stated flatly.
Yeah. But they don't really deal with that jealousy very well because they, like, basically beat him up, put him in a hole in the ground, and then they decide to sell him into slavery.
As one does.
Yep. And then they tried to cover it up by, like, taking his coat and putting blood all over it to basically, like, convince his father that he had been murdered, or not murdered, but attacked by animals.
No, and they do it in, like, isn't this your son's jacket or your son's coat?
Yeah, like, they're so
like they don't know
for no reason. And so he basically, like, he gets sold into slavery, and then the very next situation that he winds up in is, like, he's actually in a pretty decent environment working for people who are, like, pretty well off in a good home. And apparently Joseph, according to the NIV translation of the Bible, was
a looker.
Well-built and handsome, which I'm like, I don't know that you guys needed to include the well-built, but okay, whatever. It just sounds like whoever was typing that had, like, a crush on him in the translation. So he, like, the wife of the boss that he was working for also thinks that he's very well built and handsome and is like, hey, you want to get it on with me? And he said, no, thank you. So she threw him in jail.
Accused him of a crime.
Yeah, she accused him of something that he didn't do, and then he got thrown in jail. And then he was in jail for quite a while afterwards. So there's more to his story that is super awesome. He eventually ends up reconnecting with his family and is able to make some big moves that kind of is very surprising that he's able to do it, but he is full of forgiveness. So I think, like, that's the key to me, is that in his loneliness, he was well connected to God, and he continued to have faith. And then, in my opinion, he did what he had to do in circumstances that he couldn't change. It was just I'm going to take on today, and tomorrow's problems will, worry about themselves. I'm going to take on today and just, excuse me, and just keep going. But I'm going to make the right decision for today. And I think I think if he hadn't have been willing to make the right decisions in the midst of that loneliness and that frustration of being hurt so deeply, that he potentially could have shorted himself, like, the beautiful story afterwards of redemption with his family. No,
you definitely see him, regardless of, he very much is, like, his life is a, like, living example of, like, Murphy's Law, where if something can go wrong, it will go wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing after another. But like even in his lonely state and being alone, he did maintain his faith and connection with God, and he also just sought to make the place around him better.
Yeah.
And so that's really something that you can take away from that.
Yeah, I would say he really sought to be selfless in his decisions, regardless of whether or not he could have justified to himself being selfish with his decisions, because everyone had always been against him. He could have just only had interest in taking care of himself, and he didn't let his loneliness turn into bitterness, which I think is really cool. Yeah, I admire him. I admire that story a lot, and I also know that if I was in that situation, I don't think I would have been as good of a person.
No, I mean he sets a high bar.
He really
I mean, because
does.
if anybody had reason to be justifiably bitter,
Yeah.
dude, like 100%
into
did.
slavery by his family.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So the next one that we're going to look at is just kind of like the Israelites as a whole. So imagine being an Israelite during the gap between the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. It's like being stuck in limbo, kind of unsure of what's going to come next. So you've got the echoes of prophets like Jeremiah lamenting the complete destruction of Jerusalem. You have that ringing in your ears. In Lamentations 1, verses 1 and 2, he's like, it's just a collective heartbreak where he wrote, how deserted lies the city once so full of people, how like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations, so who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Like, it's just a gut-wrenching scene. So like your once vibrant city's just been reduced to just ruins and totally abandoned. And then there's Daniel trying to make sense of it, who's been exiled to Babylon. He's the voice of reason, kind of, reflecting on the 70 years of desolation that was prophesied by Jeremiah. And you can hear the frustrations in his words as he grapples with the loneliness of exile. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. So this is going to take forever. And so, it's easy to feel just abandoned there. And then, they came back. The Israelites were eventually returned to Jerusalem, were allowed to rebuild the walls when the Persians came in. And you can read all about that in some of the later sections of the Old Testament. So, and then it's just silent. And there's no prophets and no nothing for, 400 years.
Wow.
And then, boom, we can fast forward a bit to John the Baptist. And the Israelites are still wrestling with that feeling of being adrift, just rudderless. And then comes this, he's a wild man. Like he's eating locusts out in the trees.
He's so
he's
cool.
wearing animal skins, and
I don't know what he's up to, but he's cool.
but that's the guy.
Yep.
Okay, like it's always going to be an unassuming.
Crunching on a cricket.
It's always going to be unassuming. But this wild man is out in the trees, John, with a message that just shakes everybody to their core. And you can read it in Luke chapter 3, verses 2 and 3. And it paints a picture of John crying out in the desert, calling people to repentance and preparing the way for the Lord. And he's the voice in the wilderness, echoing just this longing of every single Israelite. Prepare the way for the Lord, make straight the paths for him. Every valley shall be filled in, every mountain and hill made low. The crooked roads shall become straight, the rough ways smooth. And that's what he's saying is coming.
Yeah. Man.
And
what a cool person to be.
Yes.
Like, honestly, to be the person declaring that Jesus is about to start his public ministry. Like, it's amazing.
And so, but even John, this prophet who spoke truth to power and called out hypocrisy and all of these things. I mean, this was a guy that was just out in the trees by himself. So he must have felt the weight of solitude.
Yeah.
And just being alone. And in John chapter 123, he identifies himself as the voice crying out in the wilderness, just this solitary figure just out in this vast expansive desert. And it is a reminder that even in the midst of his calling, John grappled with moments of loneliness and doubt. And you can read later where he sent message to Jesus while he was in jail saying, hey, like, are you the guy?
Yeah.
You know? But there he was, just a beacon in the night, and his message pointed the way to Jesus, who would bring comfort and companionship to all of the lonely souls of Israel.
Man, that sounds very isolating.
Yes.
I don't think I could be out in the desert for more than a couple days without
probably
having a little bit of a breakdown.
And like that was his role. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, but these are all biblical figures who experienced feeling alone and feeling like being alone and experiencing loneliness.
Yeah.
But I think one of the thread that we can at least look to, I know you have one more to do, but the
Yeah.
ones that we've got so far, it all seems to be like just falling back on that relationship with a God that knows them and loves them.
Yeah, I think that statement is also best expressed when you kind of tell the story about David, because he was real good about crying out in pain. So David is, he was going to become king of Israel after Saul, but Saul was not up for that and wanted to eliminate the threat of David. So David, I mean, he knew him. I can imagine he cared for him deeply because of the way that Saul was really, I think, was in a mental health crisis personally.
Yeah.
And so he would have these flare-ups of huge emotion, feeling tormented, and would have David come play music for him, and then he would be like, "Haha, I'm gonna throw a knife at you." So he was really not good. He was not good, and so David, he was also close with his son, Jonathan, Saul's son, Jonathan. So I'm sure that he cared deeply about this family, and I don't think that that David wanted Saul to see him as a threat at all. And so the fact that he was being, chased around and possibly attacked, I think it was heartbreaking for him. There are a lot of other situations in Psalms where we can really see that that David was expressing tons and tons of emotions to God, but the one that really stuck out to me in my reading was Psalms 25. I think just because I haven't hung out on that one for a long time before. So I'm going to just read, this is 25, picking up in verse 16. Turn and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish. Look on my affliction and my distress and take away all my sins. See how numerous are my enemies and how fiercely they hate me. Guard my life and rescue me. Do not let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness protect me, because my hope, Lord, is in you. Deliver Israel, O God, from all of their troubles. So, that one to me is just, he was so good at expressing what he was feeling in a way that I admire, and I think that was the key to how he handled his loneliness, was he put a lot of time into his poetry. And so this one surprised me in particular because I was reading this on the Bible Gateway website, and I scrolled down to a footnote that said that this psalm was an acrostic poem, which means the verses begin with the successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So we can't really see that in our translations, but it's cool that he was intentional and poured time and effort into this craft of expressing his emotions, and he was also talking to God at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think his rhythm that you can see in a lot of Psalms, I would encourage anybody who hasn't read in Psalms before or hasn't in a while, just stick your toes back into it, because it is the rhythm of how he acknowledges what he's feeling. He lets himself cry out in anguish, and then he reminds himself of who God is and what God has promised him. I think is just the great way to let yourself process for a little bit and then put it in your back pocket and say, okay, but God is with me and I know what I'm going to do next. So he's awesome.
No, that really is something, because like it is, I mean, that thread just goes right through all of them. All of these people that experienced loneliness, to one degree or another, all was able to stay rooted in their faith and take their source of strength from God and handle it in a healthy way. Like that. And David still, I mean, and John did have, even though he was, kind of like the lone person in the wilderness, like he still did have a group of people that were with him. Jesus, I mean, for, I mean, his might not have been the best, but like he did have like his inner circle of Peter and John and James. And
they were just sleepy.
and David has his crew, and so Daniel had his folks that they all got threatened to get thrown in the furnace with. Like each of them did have a small group of people that they kept around them, but when those feelings of intense loneliness came in, they knew where to go for strength from it.
And I would say, I mean, I don't know if this is, I haven't thoroughly thought this thought through, so I could be wrong. I feel like periods of time with loneliness are potentially like an opportunity to push into your faith in ways that you may not, you might not be at that point to turn to God for just company if you're surrounded by people all the time that you love, or things that you have to do, responsibilities, whatever. I think seeing in all of these examples the ways that they pushed into their faith and pushed into companionship with God and acknowledging their feelings is a great example for us.
No, because when you are in those spaces, like Jesus' example shows us, that's when you're in the most danger for being tempted. And that could be an episode in all and of itself. But we're going to look at how we've handled this in both healthy and unhealthy. I think negative examples are almost always the best, and the ones that teach the most. So we'll look at those after this clip.
It's simple but profound. He affirmed his feelings, but he had long ago settled on his faith. He believed to his core that whether he could feel it or not, that God was still on the scene. Whether he could feel it or not, that God still loved him. Whether he could feel God or not, that God was still about to do something great and accomplish something great through his life and his death.
I love that teaching there from our senior pastor, Brian Hughes, where he's talking about, Christ, he's on the cross, he's being crucified, and he could alleviate himself of all of that pain and suffering and that sense of being alone and lonely and abandoned. But, like he said, whether he could feel God's presence or not, he still knew that God loved him, that God knew him, that God was about to accomplish something big through his life and his death. And, in that moment of pain and aloneness and suffering, like he could have done all of these things to try to alleviate it and make it go away and mask it, even if temporarily, even if he knew that the result and consequences is that would have been bad for himself or others and everything like that. And that's how we often handle feeling alone or that deep sense of loneliness when you're just longing for some sort of connection or feeling. I know that I handled it in not healthy ways. Through drugs and alcohol and all of these things that I would do to try to just not feel that way. I mean, whenever we said at the top of it that we have to differentiate it from being alone and just not being surrounded by people, but loneliness is an emotional state that we try to cover up and soothe and smooth over. And it led me to just all sorts of different types of addictive behavior.
I think my kind of not spiral, but I guess progression into like unhealthy coping skills out of some of that loneliness was definitely worsened by what I was surrounding myself with as far as like influences. So I spent a lot of time on the internet, like back at the time in that day, like Tumblr was the place to be. That's where all the emo kids would go post deep quotes, and that really kind of like pushed me into a lot of like self-hatred, really, that I think I blamed myself for my loneliness in a way of that it was a me problem, and instead of letting God kind of like soothe that wound and knowing that he loves me regardless of, you know, who I am, and he created me uniquely to be that person that I am, I just ended up hating myself for a really long time, and I ended up self-harming for a while, and I'm sure that there was some influence with mental health on that, but I do think a lot that door was opened from just surrounding myself with unwise influence from the internet. Yeah.
No, and mine, whenever we talked at the top of this, like when my family life kind of imploded, and it really impacted the relationship that I had with my parents, and so I went through a long period of self-loathing, and during that time, I self-medicated with drugs and alcohol, and then whenever I got out of the house and I moved out on my own, like all of that kind of went away. And then whenever I got, flesh-eating disease, and then my marriage was really in a rocky state that I've mentioned here before, kind of led me to come to church in the first place. I was back into that same thing. Like all of that stuff kind of came back up all together, like only multiplied by like 50, it was so much worse. And so
I think your brain learns too.
Yes.
Like, this made me feel better then, so this is what I'm
So
going to
this
lean
is what
on.
I'm going to do
But
now.
you have to teach your brain something
Yes.
different.
And so that's what led me into church and my relationship with Christ. And I ended up figuring out a more healthy way to deal with it. And that was through small group. Like that was where where we talk about here, like get real. Like that's one of our 5 purposes. And that's one of the tools that we have to do that is get yourself in a small group.
Yeah.
And it was, hey, this is me, this is who I am, these are the things I'm going through, and like being accepted for all of my brokenness, notwithstanding, but like being welcomed into a place and accepted. And that started helping me get onto a path to deal with that feeling of loneliness that I had always carried with me.
Yeah.
In
so
that
you had
space.
support while you were
Yes.
kind of rewiring your coping skills. That's awesome.
And so that was really how that worked for me,
That's cool.
and to deal with it in a healthy way.
I have the kind of the same story as far as like the mile marker of improvement there was from coming back to church regularly. But the way that I was kind of met with what would help me best was serving. So I needed a commitment, and I also needed a task to do to feel comfortable being somewhere. Because at the time I still, I even today, like I still have some social anxiety. It's definitely gotten a lot better.
And it, because like if I'm in a strange place that I don't really know and I don't have a role,
Yes.
I get awkward real quick.
Yeah. So no, I like having like a spot of like, okay, I'm supposed to be in this spot.
Yes.
Like I have a job to do, but it still let me be around other people who were also a positive influence, and it also helped me like come consistently because I had made a commitment to serve as often as I could. So for a good year, it was every Sunday I would be there because I had made a promise, and it was like slow form like exposure therapy to positivity that kind of like helped me bring my mindset back to thinking positively about myself, about what Jesus says about me, just exposing myself. It's kind of like the opposite of I expose myself to all this world of deep, heavy, hard feelings and self-hatred coming from them. So I kind of flipped into I'm forcing myself to be exposed to a good community. And the way that I could do that comfortably at the time was to have a role and to have made a commitment by serving. And now the benefit of it is that I feel like I know my community so well that I don't feel like I have to have a role to be in a situation like that. Like I can comfortably come to events and services and stuff, and I don't have to have a job to do. I just get to, I can just be there. So yeah, that definitely, it helped me pull myself out of that nasty place. But I couldn't have done it without God.
No, and the same, because whenever I feel like I'm the only one that can relate to something that I'm going through, like I cope with it in a terrible way. Yeah. And once I got into my small group and I started saying, hey, these are the things I'm experiencing. And, I've gone through something like that. I've gone through something like that. I've experienced something like that. It removes that sense of being alone in it. Yeah.
Or like I'm the only one that's ever had to do this. I think loneliness can really lead you to some really self-deprecating victim behavior of I'm the only one. At least for me, it did that for me. I don't want to speak to everybody's situation, but for me, it really let me stay trapped in feeling like I was a victim in a way that didn't produce anything healthy in me. So
no, and that's one of the things that Peter says in one of his letters, take faith and comfort in the fact that other Christians are going through, I'm paraphrasing here big time. Yeah. But other people are suffering in the same way that you are. So that removes, when I read that, that was such a light bulb moment that, what I'm going through, because if you take that at face value, at some point in time, somewhere on the earth, it's somebody in history, has been a follower of Jesus, has undergone the exact same thing that I'm going through and has come out it on the other side. Just the age, the number of people that have existed all over the place that have been followers of Jesus. Just the statistics alone are in your favor. Somebody has gone through what you have gone through.
There is a success story out there
There
somewhere.
is a success story out there. I might not know it, but just the data and the numbers back up the fact that there is one somewhere. Yeah. And that removed, that was such just a light bulb moment for me. And it was just and this is how they did it, by staying connected to their faith. Yeah. Which is what every single one of those biblical figures is a testament to.
Yeah. I think that's true. The common thread of just pushing into connection with God, even when you don't feel like it. And I think I can identify with David in particular of his tool there of when he didn't feel like it was to just verbally let it out and then remind himself of the truth. And I'm sure there's some other stories there that you can pull different things out from, but that, to me, that's the one that sticks out the most is I'm going to acknowledge what's going on, but I'm not going to let myself stay there. Yes. Yeah. Good stuff.
Absolutely. And so we want to hear from you and what you think of this conversation. So leave us a review and we'll send you a mug, and find us in our Facebook group and all the places. And if you need any assistance in any of the things that may have come to mind from listening to this conversation, just fill out the Connect card on our website and we will be in touch. Yeah. And we'll see you back next week for another episode of the After Chat.
Thanks for joining us for The After Chat. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To be the first to hear our next episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button and get notifications for new content. You can also follow us on social media on Instagram at PCC Wired and Facebook at Passion Community Church. For additional resources and links, check out the description. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on The After Chat.